was doing a talk into a group, and as I was talking to the group, people were coming in. I had this couple come in. This couple came in. I got my voices straight. And when the wife walked in, she had a limp on her one side of her hip. And I didn't make much of it. She sat down. And I went through going through my talk, and then we started doing some tapping. As we're doing the tapping, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that she was crying. So I stopped my talk and I went over to her and I just said, how can I help you? What's going on? She said, well, about a year ago, I was in an accident. And she said, I had this pain in my hip, kind of a spur in my hip, and I have not been able to make it go away. But while we were tapping, it like exploded in my hip and went down my leg, and it kind of disappeared. And I of course I had her get up and walk across the room, and of course she didn't have any limp. So she was very impressed with me and decided to join in with some of my sessions. And we came in and we were working on this. And the crux of it was that this accident she was in, she and her father were very close knit. They had a business together, they worked together all the time. And this one particular evening, her brother was in town and they were going to drive down to her brother's house. And it was about a 2 or 3 hour drive. And as she was getting in the car, she was going to sit in the front seat and her dad was going to sit in the back. And she said, Dad, I'm really tired and I want to lay down in the back. Would you mind switching, places with me? And he's like, oh, that's fine. Except when they had the accident, someone died, the father died, and she had such love for her father, such grief and all that from what was going on, plus all the guilt. We kind of talk about this too, as one of the things we deal with is guilt in this process we go through. And she was, as she started to talk about it, she said, all the thoughts come out in her mind of, how terrible of me to do this. It should have been me up there. I can't believe I killed my father. I mean, those are the literal words coming out of her mouth. And we literally had to work through all of those words and all of that grief that she was holding, because it what I find in it, and it really helps me to express what this does even to the body, and how even grief and guilt and things like that can work into a physical format in your body. And that's what that was. And we worked through it. It took about 6 or 7 sessions for her, and she left there with no pain in her hip at all. And about a year later, I ran into her husband at another talk that I was doing, and I asked her. I said, she didn't go with him at that time. I said, how is she doing? He said that never came back.
Wow.
And again, just proves out again how strong our mind is and how it can do detrimental things to our body as well as our mind. And that was a big proof of it. And I don't know. It's like I say, it's been years since I've seen her, but I would imagine that she's changed her whole feelings around her dad. And what we came back with a lot of that was talking about, you know, would you really want your dad to see you go through this? And he loved you so much that he wouldn't want you to go through this kind of suffering. You know, so that was a very eye-opening experience for me to see what the mind can do to the body.
Well, hello, this is Gina
And this is Don.
with Focused Healthy Family. This is podcast number 209. And today we're talking about facing feelings, and this is Personal Caregivers Part 2. So this is our third installment of our Facing Feelings. But first, we have a joke.
Oh yes, let me get my jokes up here. Sorry, my mind went kind of blank on me there for a second. All right. Well, there's 3 different ones here. I'm going to go with the one I think's the worst first. Don't complain about our coffee. You'll be old and weak yourself someday. Management. The next one is they say you're old as you feel. I think I must be an exhumed mummy. And the last one, have you, let's see, hey, have you, let's see, this is a doctor with his little ear scope into the side of an ear. He says, hey, you have a suppository in your ear. And the man goes, rats, now I know where my hearing aid did.
And today I'm going to take a tip from Mike Collins' book, Caregiver 101 101 Ways to Keep Caregiving from Making You Crazy. This is by Mike Collins. I hope we put this link on every podcast here. So, tip number 37, the insanity definition. The old cliche is attributed to Albert Einstein is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So, if you are not experiencing caregiving as you wish, you may need to do. You may do things or see things differently. If you're not experiencing caregiving as you wish, you may need to do things or see things differently. If you're expecting others to help make, maybe you are not asking for the help, or at least maybe you're not asking for help in a way that they would understand. If you are overstressed, maybe you're not using stress management techniques that work for you. So ask yourself this question: what could you be doing differently that might make a difference in your caregiving experience? I love that,
Well, and
doing.
it kind of talks about what, we're going to be talking a little bit about burnout. And one of the things they talk about that is asking for help.
Mhm. So I've heard parents say this. I've heard family members of aging loved ones say, I tell them over and over and over again. And it's like, yeah, if you keep doing the same thing and they're not responding differently, the problem is not them, right? We need to look at our approach um, to get different results. So we're diving into facing our feelings and again, talking more about personal caregivers. And Don, as you talked about that story and the power of our mind on our body, I mean, we see this all the time and the effects it has physically and the power of our mind to heal.
Yes.
The other side of the coin of that story that you told.
Yeah, it was that was very rewarding to be able to, and I now see it quite a bit that if you get this changed up here, it can really change a lot of things, not just.
So, the last podcast, we touched on some of these areas of chronic stress, guilt, anticipatory grief, anger, resentment, loneliness, and isolation, a loss of self, and burnout and caregiver exhaustion. So, looking at those of us who are caregivers in whatever capacity, um, personal caregivers, that we are personally helping to care for another loved one, whether it's emotionally, mentally, or physically. And you might have adult children, but in some ways you might be supporting them, whether they're in college or they depend on you for whatever means. So kind of thinking about this broadly as a caregiver. We touched on some articles last week. Don, did you want to start with one of them?
With one what?
The articles.
Uh, yeah.
Little communication breakdown here.
Uh, well, they go through like the first one is talk about healthcare, talk to a healthcare provider, getting some um, additional help from from the medical world, but also other caregivers that can help you through this too.
So in caring for yourself, and whether it's maybe a support group. There are support groups for lots of different things, whether it's grief, but um, what there's support for people with dementia, with stroke recovery, all these different aspects, going to a meeting with other people dealing with similar things. And the beauty of today is finding even an online support group, whether it's a group of people that are a chat that you can discuss things over time, or regular meetup that they hold. Take a look around, see what other resources are, and if we find several, we can post those.
Well, and one thing I run into this quite a bit, and I just ran into somebody recently. They you kind of give up on yourself, and they talk about making time for oneself, and I find, and I think we're getting more and more aware of that, of giving time to yourself, but it becomes very, and we saw this too in what we did. You don't have the time, the moments to be able to think about stuff. If you taking care of your aging loved one, you're also working. Plus, a lot of people have the sandwich generation where they're raising their kids at the same time, and so we always we always kind of put ourselves in the back burner on it. And I think that's something that needs to keep changing. I think we're getting better at it, but it's at the very infant stage of that.
And we can get so busy and get out of the habit of things that we were doing that cared for ourselves and not realize it can kind of slowly build up over time.
Well, yeah, and they talk about asking for help, and I deal with a lot of what I call pleasers and givers in this. I probably, 80% of the people that come to me are that. And, this takes pleasing and giving to another level with caregiving. Um, but what I have the hardest time, even with just the simple pleasers, is getting them to change the communication that they have to put out, you know, because it becomes harder and harder the more you become a pleaser to be able to ask for help, to be able to take the moment, because what we take in ourselves is the burdening of it. I don't want to be a burden on somebody else, and I have to do, not only do we do tapping, but I also talk a lot about communication, um, how they can approach somebody. You know, I often, you and I used to teach that the how to talk so kids will listen, and I always thought that was a children's book, and it is written for children, but parents and children. But the principles of it, I start using for these people that are having a hard time asking for what they need, because like that special, the very first chapter, they talk about you know, being able to respond differently to somebody, and then um, being able to know when to say no, when to say yes, all of that kind of stuff, all plays into it big time.
We've also done work, Don, you and I, on reflective listening
Hmm.
and the power of using I statements. Because as soon as you say you always, the accusatory tone of you, but when I come home and I see the kitchen table covered in things and I've got bags full of groceries, I become frustrated. Um, that I have even more on my plate, or and make but letting your feelings be known, but owning them, right? There's
Hmm.
circumstances and things that happen, and when we point the finger and say you, then the other person gets defensive, and that doesn't set us up for further communication. So yeah, learning communication strategies. That book is great for learning communication strategies. It gives all kinds of tools and techniques, um, in regards to parenting children. And you're right, Don. There's so many avenues there that we can utilize in all aspects of our relationships, whether it's family or business or friends or coworkers, as well as those people we might be caring for.
I've recommended to a lot of people with aging, that are dealing with their aging loved one, because, like I said, it's the principles behind it that really, not just I it's fun to listen to the stories because they talk about kids and all, but the principles behind it really stand up for this. Like I said, I've used it with clients. I even used it in talking with your dad, when we were dealing with, a lot of times I would just listen to him and say, oh, that's interesting. No matter what he was saying, if so.
So that being open, listening to someone acknowledging their feelings, being in the moment, being present with them, and looking at the situation and helping them to um, kind of get to the bottom of things or identify what the needs are behind things. So, yeah, there's some really great tools there. So, learning how to better communicate with others. Don, you and I participated in a counselor and workshop session from the Keeping You Love You Find series
Mm.
by
Horrible Hendrix.
Orville Hendricks and Helen Hunt. And there's several different books in the series. One focuses on parenting and learning those skills of um, reflective listening, mirroring, where you're, letting the other person know that you've heard what they've said. Although I know that it personally annoys our teenager. Why do you keep repeating what I'm saying? Um, I think I had a client one time who said, "Are you going to keep saying okay, okay, okay after everything I say?"
Yeah, you have to form those words to the person you're dealing with, you know.
And like we've used things where, I just need to vent right now. I need you to put up some armor, and just not take this personally, or just, it's usually, yeah, I just need to get these thoughts and feelings out. Again, trying to be respectful and really owning those feelings and using your I statements. You know, I feel this, when this happens, I feel this. When I experience this, I feel, however it is, sad, angry, frustrated, um, disappointed.
Well, the other side of that is, and I talk about this with EFT. I think one of the things that it does over time, it kind of helps what I call build a shield for you. Um, you know, when you're dealing with an aging loved one, a lot of time, when they get angry, they get mad, they get, and be able to not take that stuff in and have that shield to be able to understand, understand in your mind what's going on for them. I in fact I just talked to a client about this, that she was just getting really mad at what her mom was saying, and I said, let's see if we can place, see if you can even put your shoes in her shoes and see what she's dealing with, and then have this shield to be able to say, okay, that's mom's and she's dealing with some aging, and that's her situation. It's not mine to take in.
Yeah, and that can be challenging, especially with our family members. I mean, think about with kids. They come at you, they're angry and upset. If you respond in a reactionary way, it just fuels the fire. Don calls it climbing the walls of anxiety.
Yeah.
And it can be challenging, though. You're in the middle of making dinner, making some phone calls, looking at emails, and your kid or whoever comes at you with all this complaints or frustrations or feelings, sometimes really big feelings, emotions, and you're not in a place to deal with it. So you need some coping strategies. You need deep breath.
Yeah, yeah. And
um,
some simple tapping even can do it,
Simple
along.
tapping, rubbing this little sore spot here in your shoulder. Um, you also can say, you have a lot going on here. I need just 10 seconds to breathe. Let me step out of the room and I'll come back and I'll be ready for you, or whatever you need to do, and obviously when you have young children, that's more challenging, or a child with special needs who's not
Mm.
able to self-regulate well. And that's where getting routines of strategies to help you cope
Find the different resources of.
and having a if you get practice something, then when you're in that situation, it's much easier to use um, those skills.
Do you want to go on the other article talking about grief?
Sure. um, well, and the other thing, talking about caregiver burnout, um,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and
Didn't.
how you recover from that. Here it just talks about finding someone you trust, um, setting realistic goals that you can work towards, being more educated and informed on the situation that you're dealing with, and being realistic about your loved one's condition. So, getting more
Mhm.
information can be so powerful, to come to a place of acceptance. talks about taking care of yourself. It talks about eating well,
Mm.
resting well. Water intake is so important and so under. It doesn't even mention it on
You
here,
bet.
but hydration. We need fluids. Our body is what, more than 70% fluids. We need be drinking water. Things like tea and coffee and other beverages that are caffeinated. Caffeine is a diuretic, meaning it's pushing water out of your body. So that's counter affecting hydration. Green teas can be really helpful, and some amount of caffeine is obviously manageable. And are we getting enough water? Are we getting enough, um, water without sugar in it?
Mm.
To we around here we buy seltzer, flavored seltzer water. Our kids like to drink that as an alternative to other things. We kind of stopped buying juice years ago, just the quantity of sugar in it.
Mm.
Although when our kids are sick, it's like, okay, what do you feel up to? We'll buy juices and things then. So thinking about that, for me, having the water bottle helps because it's right there. The other way to help get more water in is buying hydration packets. You can find these in different flavors in powdered forms. You can find them sugar free or without artificial sweeteners of any kind, or with very low amounts of sugar. You can also use fruit. I like lemon, whole frozen strawberries, other things to flavor your water. That can help you to consume more. And if you're dealing with issues of electrolyte imbalances and getting the minerals and things you need, there are different um, things like I talked about that you can put in your water to help you increase your intake of it. You can just use a regular pitcher, put some fresh or frozen fruit into it that kind of diffuses into the water. You can either use a mesh bag or they make specific diffusers, but you really don't need that. If you have a screen or something as you pour out the water, it can be a great way to get you as well as others drinking more water. And then the last thing they have is accepting feelings, knowing it's
Mm.
okay if you have negative feelings, right? Not trying to, well, let's be more positive about this. Don't feel that way. Oh, don't cry,
Yeah,
cheer
yeah.
up.
Well, and like the way I kind of talk to my clients about it, if it's a if you scale of 1 to 10, and and that feeling you have is a 10 and a 10 plus, meaning that it's the worst, and you try to tell your mind that everything's okay, I'm fine. I know my mind kind of blows up with that kind of thought. It's like you're not fine. And so being able to accept it so you can work on changing it. So, and grief is something that takes a long time to get past. In fact, I don't think we ever fully get past grief.
No, it's more, I was talking with someone recently, someone I work with in my work as an occupational therapist who lost her husband. And, I talked about that, grief, it's like I have days when I just cry. I'm like, that's okay,
Yeah,
and it's a
yeah,
gradual acceptance of it that it slowly gets less intense and
yeah.
and to
Kind of
be okay with that.
you kind of go from like the grief and the pain around it to, like I say, to more of a grief with sadness that will linger. I still miss my dad. I wish that there are times that
I
I
never
could see
got to
him.
meet him. I never
Yeah,
got to meet my father-in-law, and obviously never got to meet uh, our children, his grandchildren. So yeah, sort of a sadness there and acknowledging that. So, we talked about taking care of yourself. Obviously, exercise, nutrition, having, my favorite on the go is to make myself a smoothie. I use collagen powder. There's different forms of protein powders, but I like one that's just pure collagen. It gives me a source of protein. I'll use frozen fruit. I'll use unsweetened almond milk. I often put some like frozen spinach in it, some kind of greens, and with the protein powder, I'll even put in more than the 2 scoops that gives me 20 grams to make sure I'm getting that. And sometimes it's hard to eat when you're on the go or anxiety and stress, but you might be able to drink some fluids.
well, we talked about, yeah, I think in the last one we kind of touched upon the idea of because they talk about this about recognizing the grief, understanding. We I think we still kind of think of grief as something that's with a funeral, with somebody dying, but
Hmm.
it goes into much deeper than that. There's grief around every kind of change and transition, whether it's small or big. And I think it's important that we recognize it and that it it takes some time to get past that grief.
As an example, after living over 22 years at our former house, where two of our children were born into that home and lived there their whole life until that point, um, and we moved. And as exciting as it was to move, there was some sadness. I miss the old house. I still get frustrated when I can't find something. I can picture exactly where it was at the old house, especially when it comes to the kitchen. And I'm like, it's supposed to be right here. Um, and there was some sadness. We really enjoyed where we lived. We had lived in the Charlotte area and this, the section outside of Charlotte for a long time. I mean, pretty much since I moved to Charlotte, we had been in the same side of town and this general area, and it was just part of our life. And there was definitely some sadness there, and that change and
Mhm.
that loss. And I used to take a walk through the neighborhood, and there was some wooded area, that some unfinished lots, and there was like a cleared dirt path, and I would take a walk through the woods easily. And
Got
all,
my cardio hill, remember that?
yeah, there was a real steep hill in the neighborhood.
Yep.
So the sadness, we left behind an outside cat who a neighbor kind of took over caring for. Well, there were two when we left. And that change. Um, my parents had built a house on Lake Murray, South Carolina, and to retire to. And we would gather down there. And when it got to the point where they realized they couldn't continue living there, the upkeep of this very large house and the property, on the water and the dock and everything, dealing with the boats, there was a lot of sadness.
Hmm.
And when we left there, we no longer would have big family gatherings with all the kids, and we'd have plenty of bedrooms for all of us to sleep in, and we could get away. For me, it was people were now coming locally to us, and so we were local. But whereas before going there, I would take off from work. It would be away from home. It would be an opportunity to get away. So grief can look many different ways as our children go through different stages of our life. Um, Experiencing grief feelings, Don, with the things you've been through,
Hmm.
from the first time you had a heart attack, and just shifting that role of being your partner. And then I had to step into a caregiver role, and that changes. It changes our relationship. It changes how I look at things. You've had open heart surgery, you've had a second massive heart attack, and um, so there's grief in that experience. And even though you're currently healthy and functioning well and things are in good order, there's still a sense of loss of what was. And
Yeah,
you
I had a
know
client call me today and he said, "Are you doing okay? Yeah. Are you feeling okay?" I said, "Yeah, I feel really good." He said, "Are you back in business?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." I said, so he wants to work with me again, but he was a really good client, and so it was really neat to him asking me that kind of questions. I hadn't talked to him in a long time.
okay, so somehow he knew, him personally as well, that he knew that you had had another heart attack.
Well,
And
I was dealing with him at the time that
oh, he was one of the ones you were
yeah,
working with.
and so I had at this last time, and so I just let him know what was going on, that I had to back off. Anyway, I mean, the last thing well, not the last thing, but one of the things they talk about is being more present with the grief and
Mm.
not wrapping too much into the future of it.
So not trying to push it away, not trying to
Oh, yeah, that's
manage it, but okay. Yeah, it's like you go through the five stages of grief with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and looking at, the acceptance and the different components. So like being okay, like right now, I'm just really angry about this situation, and just acknowledging that right now, I'm just really sad. And so being present with what you're feeling and not trying to push it away and not trying to jump to the next stage or, um,
well, you talk about Dr. Kubler-Ross. um, when I don't know if I'm trying to remember because I think I took that after my dad died, but I set that up beforehand because I think it was at the end of the
Oh, you signed up for a course
beforehand.
and that was dealing with the stages of grief,
I think
loss or
I think we set all
death
that
and
up
dying
for the
class.
next year,
Okay.
and it was kind of interesting. It was a good learning process because it does take you through the steps that happen. So, but
So yeah, being present with where you are right now and just coming to that acceptance. Um, so we'll be exploring more topics as related to this.
yeah, we're going to be going into the siblings and the other members of the family. Like I said, everybody gets wrapped up in this, so we'll be talking more about that. So, but it's thanks for joining us today for our podcast, and we hope you really enjoyed it. Hopefully, you'll be able to leave us some comments or some thoughts of what you want to hear from us. We'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to leave us a comment, share your thoughts. Be sure to like us, subscribe, and share the podcast with someone who might benefit from it, that might like that. If you're finding it difficult to stay calm during your day, or panic or overwhelm are becoming more frequent, we invite you to explore my EFT Discovery Series. EFT is often described as weird. After a few sessions, their reactions shift from, wait, tapping does what? To, wow, look what EFT did for me. I don't know what that means. I'm getting a thump on the floor.
you're spinning, Todd.
I'm spinning. Okay, I'll try to stationary. Uh, and if you're navigating the challenges of caring for an aging loved one, be sure to visit our senior care page on our website for support, resources, and guidance. You can also find wellness tips, caregiving insights, and more helpful tools at focusedhealthyfamily.com. You can connect with us on Facebook at Focused Healthy Family, Instagram at Focused Healthy Family 1, YouTube at Focused Healthy Family. You can join us every Thursday as we publish this podcast. And you can also look into the archives of it and see some of the different things that we've interviewed on our podcast now. You can see the latest of ours right on the website, but you can also go back to YouTube and find our archived um, sessions. I'm saying sessions. Our
Right,
podcast.
podcast. And the first year we were just audio. So yeah.
There's a lot of different places to be able to find. And you can also check us out at focusedhealthypodcast.com. And remember, how you speak to your children and your loved ones today shapes their future and yours.